Bonjour à tous, merci d'être là pour...
So, hello everyone, and
Dov Alfon
thanks for joining me in welcoming Dov Alfon and the team who are working on the adaptation of his book
très belle série,
into what's probably going to be a wonderful
Je
series.
suis désolée, on va parler anglais parce que Léora...
So, what should we do? Should we do it in French?
D'accord, parce que Léora...
There is a translation.
Donc, bienvenue, Dov.
So, welcome, Dov, and thanks for accepting our invitation. Perhaps we could start by
Racontez un peu votre parcours et
talking about you, how you ended up writing a novel, because originally you were a journalist.
une histoire dans les services secrets.
You also have a bit of a background in Israeli secret services. How did you get to this point?
Je suis en fait un ancien espion
I'm in fact a former spook,
et donc les questions se posent.
and the question emerges, are you a former spook, or are you a spook? Do you go on spying people for the rest of your life? But I found out after military service and various other services in Israeli intelligence services, in an ultra-secret unit called 8200, which is the French title of the book, Unité 8200. I thought that the functions of journalist, particularly in writing articles, were quite similar to my previous job, because there's a lot of information around us, but you need to select it and decide which information is important and which information is just white noise. So when you're in the intelligence services, it's, I don't know, noise emitted by broadcast by other intelligence services who are trying to create a diversion. And when you're a journalist, it's going to be advertising, PR from multinationals who are going to try and who are going to try and steal the agenda, who's going to try and steal the news and create more noise around that. So I thought there were similarities. But it's true that I actually wrote the first chapter of my book slightly after my military service, about 30 years ago. And any professional who would read my book, the chapter 1 is a bit more childish or juvenile, because after I left, after you leave the Israeli army, you're in the reserve. It's a bit like the Swiss army. Every year you have a reserve period where you need to go back to your former unit. And after a period of 5 years, they asked me to take a polygraph test, a lie detector. Do you take drugs? Do you have Iranian friends? Stuff like that. And one of the questions was, are you going to write a book about your experience in Unit 8200? I said no. And that wasn't true, and it was true, and the polygraph said it was. But when I came out of the bunker, I said, that actually would be a pretty good idea. So they gave me the idea, writing the book. So I wrote the first chapter, and then I understood that basically I had nothing to say. So I put it away. I became a journalist. I was a reporter. Then I was editor of Haaretz, which is probably one of the 10 best dailies in the world, the oldest Hebrew language newspaper. It's celebrating its 100th anniversary. But by being a journalist, an editor-in-chief, by having lunch all the time with politicians, be they American, French, and of course Israeli, I all of a sudden understood the story that I could tell. The story was, how does the world go round? How does it work? And in this post-truth era, I thought that writing an espionage book was something I should probably pull out of my drawer and try and envision in a different way. And I would say that in recent years, there's an amazing rebirth of the espionage genre that had been dropped for about 20 years. In France, of course, everyone saw Le Bureau des Légendes. But at the same time, in the US, the Americans is probably the greatest award-winning series of our day, and there are plenty of other examples. And over the past 3-4 years, and I had no intention, in fact, I'm part of this new wave. I'm absolutely not a pioneer. I'm not surfing the wave, but the espionage genre is coming back with a vengeance. And the book had a very profound impact, unexpectedly. But what about fiction? You could have chosen to write, I don't know, a real-life account or documentary type of book. How many people in the room have read the book, if you could raise your hand? So I'm not going to spoil this. Okay. I won't spoil it for you. So to answer that as far as I can, it's kind of very flippant. It's really not Scandinois where you need to be scared from page one. It would be more sort of in the big French classics, Jean Baumard, Sébastien Japrisot. There's a lot of humor. And I would say that the things that I have to say about how politicians work today, how Netanyahu, Berlusconi, Donald Trump, Viktor Orban, Erdogan, how does it work in these so-called democracies? And in fact, the story is so terrifying that I thought that fiction, almost comical fiction, was probably the only way for people to continue reading the book. Otherwise, it would have been too scary. And a lot of the critique that I received, particularly in France, point at the apparent contrast between a plot that talks about corruption, and there's like a huge plot within not only Israeli and French government, it's kind of a global plot. But you laugh a lot when you're reading it. But what I would want for the reader is that 3-4 days after reading it and having a good laugh, that he should remember when he picks up his smartphone or opens his car with the electronic key fob that goes beep beep with a very innocuous noise, while there are actually 5 satellites that know that you've just opened your car door and that you're going to go from one place to another. I would like the reader to remember all the time what that's all about. Could you just pitch the plot without spoiling? No, but I'll tell you what the first chapter is. The first chapter is a young Israeli who lands at Charles de Gaulle Airport. He's part of that startup nation. He's a start-upper, as they're called today, just like any other start-upper. But he's a bit of a joker, and so he comes out of the airport, and you know there's there's this kind of sea of people who are holding a placard with someone's name on it. There's sort of headhunters or family or hostesses with a name on a piece of cardboard. I just thought it was very weird in our electronic days where everyone has an app, that there should still be someone who could stand there with a name and that you could just go up to them and say, "Hi, it's me." So with his start-upper friends, he goes up to absolutely superb blonde wearing a red dress and say, "Hi, it's me." And it was a very bad joke. And he's going to die because of it. So if you see someone with a sign with a name on it, don't just go up to them and say, "Hello, it's me," if it's not you. There might be a bit of a tragic message that will come out of that. And then, of course, our heroes, who are an Israeli intelligence colonel of Unit 8200, a young lieutenant in Tel Aviv, and a French police inspector who's perceived as being one of these French cliches, kind of grumpy, maigret type, but who very quickly is going to have very interesting relationships with Abadi. Well, this trio of characters will need to understand who they really wanted to kidnap, and that's how it starts. Okay, so we've talked about the tone. You said that humor allowed you to take a step back and talk about serious problems, but with an apparent lightheartedness. So the book was hugely successful in Israel first.
Est-ce que Léora
Leora? What?
tell us what you did about it?
Okay. I bought the book. I read the first 10 pages that contain more or less the beginning of the plot that Dov was talking about. And as I came to page 11, I was already holding my cell phone, calling the head of drama of Keshet, the people that I work for, and I was saying, Carney, I'm reading a book, I really think you should buy the rights for it. And what fascinated me about the book, actually it's the same things that Dov is talking about. It's the fact that you can talk about subject which is so deep and serious and affects everybody's life today in such a light and entertaining tone. And I thought this can be a really great drama series. And fortunately, they followed my advice. They got the rights. And here we are, trying to adapt it into a TV series. Should I elaborate some more?
Oh yes, we want to know more. So what happened next? Because you're a writer, so that was an instinct and intuition that it would be a great series.
Oh.
You convinced your network partner and...
Yeah, actually it was very easy because I was a part of the team that wrote Fauda, the first season, and then I went on to write the second season of False Flag. So I'm in a way considered an authority on those subjects of, high-end drama series where espionage and conflict are like the major theme. And we thought this one is going to be a different one because of the tone, because the tone has this very subtle irony to it, and it's a lot of fun. And I started out adapting it from an Israeli point of view, because actually it's an Israeli story happening in Paris. And Paris felt a little bit like a backdrop for a very Israeli story. And I wrote the first episode, and everybody was very happy. And then we thought, Keshet thought really it's a great opportunity for co-production. And maybe we find a French partner, and we can dig deeper into the French side of the story. And that's how Sandra entered the scene. And maybe we ask her.
Just before we hear you, Sandra, what did you know about that, Dov, at that point? Were you aware of
Alors, je regagne le français, sauf il y a des gens qui ne comprennent pas le français dans la...
Let me just get back to...
Je retourne au français.
I'll just get back to French.
La première fois que j'ai vu
In fact, the very first time that I saw Laura Kamenetsky's name, it was well before she became an authority in the world of drama and spies and so on. Because my daughter watched a teen show. There was really a feminist show about a group of football players who were in high school and who wanted to play football. And of course, the school doesn't want them to, and so on. And my daughter, I absolutely could not unglue her. And she watched them over and over again with her friends. They had the dialogues, they did voiceovers on top of it. And they said, "Oh, Dad, you must watch this with me." And I thought, so I just wrote Leora Kamenetsky as being the main screenwriter. And it was really radical for the time. But now Israeli shows are extremely radical for their time, because there are always two steps before all of the others, so I wasn't really surprised. And then, of course, I was really happy to find out that she wanted to write a screenplay for my book. I thought it was a great honor. There's nothing better when you're an Israeli writer. of books. So I already was really flattered. And then my agent in Britain was really unhappy because I'd given the rights to them because Lehora had read the book in Hebrew far before it became successful elsewhere. And they still, in London, consider that they probably could have made 100 times more money if I'd waited longer. But it's fine. Never mind. And the book followed, I don't know, it followed its own track. I didn't actually do anything. The book, the rights were sold at the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2018 to a British publisher called Christopher McLaws. He's 82 years old. He's the man who discovered Stieg Larsson and who then produced Millennium. He discovered Ishiguro, Gorky Park, plenty of books. And he's really well known for picking up a manuscript, even if it's already been published, and reworking it. And that's how in France, for instance, we translated Stieg Larsson's first book, The Man Who Hated Women, or whatever the title was, from the original. But then when the Christopher McLaws book became hugely famous, everyone decided to call it The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. So I followed his advice. The rights were sold, and in fact 4 hours after Christopher McLaws announcing that he'd bought the rights for an Israeli novel at the Frankfurt Book Fair, 4 sales were made between that and the end of the evening. Spain, Italy, everyone bought it. And this week, the book is #1 bestseller in the Times, in the TLS list. In France, the rights were bought from Liana Levi, who's a very small publisher, bought for the paperback edition by Folio Gallimard Police, and that will be published again in January or February in France. And in Germany, in Italy, it's even a bestseller in Bulgaria. So there really is an international hunger. People want to understand our society, and I'm very happy that Yorav is going to try to reflect that on television. Did you already have, while you were writing the novel, the idea that it could become a film or a series? No, not at all, because if you're a professional reader, all of my heroes, all of my protagonists think one thing and say another, because I'm trying to describe a world of duplicity, of lies, of betrayal. But if I was more familiar with the world of TV or cinema production, I would know that on screen, everything that happens must be shown to the viewer. So it's much more difficult. But surely it can be done, no? Yeah, well, it's a great challenge for this team. Sandra. So for the French part, it was pretty much the same as when Dov initially sold the rights. I discovered the project at Série when Keshet presented it. At the time, it was a 100% Israeli project. And the book had not yet been published in French, and I think even the actual translation into English hadn't been made yet. So, in fact, I came into this project, I hadn't even read the book at all, but I had heard about the plot, in the sense that Keshet had pitched it, and had, of course, sent me a kind of presentation document to see what the series was, and I had read Leora's script also. So I came into the project for 2 reasons. The first one is because this story is an amazing story. And it's actually not easy to find stories that mix French characters and foreign characters, organic stories. We were saying that earlier, there hasn't ever really been a kind of Franco-Israeli series. I'm not talking about stuff that is part funded by one country and shot in the other one. I'm talking about a series that mixes elements or characters who are both French and Israeli. And there, there was the whole the whole backdrop, the whole canvas, and so we took that and we worked on it with David. We fleshed out the French characters, the French issues and problems, so that France, or at least Paris, did not just serve as a backdrop, because it's set 100% in Paris. So that was the first element, the organically French-Israeli element. And then the second element was also my relationship with Keshet. In my previous job for Newen, I had developed a project with Keshet after RFP, a call for projects. We'd worked for a couple of years together with Attar Dekel, who would have loved to be here, but who is my equivalent at Keshet. And Carney Ziv, Leora was talking about her earlier. She's director of fiction at Keshet. We had worked together on this call for projects. We'd selected a project, which we'd also presented at Série 3 years ago and sold to a French network. So we were very keen to do something together again, and we were saying that earlier. In terms of co-production, you have the story, of course, but you also have the human adventure. When you spend a lot of time with your partners, it's better if you get on okay. So with Keshet, we really wanted to work together again. So before I'd even read the book, we already really wanted to work together on that story, and that's how I joined the project. I met Leora very quickly, and we got on very well. I really loved her instinctively, and I was familiar with her work, and my role was to try and find a French writer who could add to the structure, and that's where David came into the picture. Although he's in fact much more than French, he's French and plenty of other things. David, tell us who you are. Who are you, David? So, I'm adopted French, because I lived in Hungary, in Sweden, in China, and South Africa. And I'm more from the world of feature films. I've written and directed feature films. I've also been screenwriters for many different films, war photographers, mad Flemish choreographers. I directed contemporary dance, and I thought, why not TV? And what I thought was extraordinary in this adventure was, of course, first meeting Leora, and how we managed to be on the same wavelength and decide very early on that the most important thing in Dov's book was the tone, which is incredible, and which really allows us to penetrate a really cynical and dark world without kind of wallowing in the spiritual despair that exists in today's political world. And also to find a way to transform Paris and the French characters so that they no longer just accessories or playthings for the Israeli characters, to make them into real characters themselves, something that the French public can relate to and also identify with the issues of today in France and feel more involved. And it's been a fantastic adventure, and I hope that we'll remain as positive and energetic all the way. So, I mean, it's a bit of a simplistic question, but what do you plan on changing? Stop me if I'm wrong, but apparently you have written a proposal for an adaptation that has not yet been approved by the French broadcaster. What do you actually intend to change compared to the book? Is it to make the project more French than it already is? I don't think they'll answer. Maybe I need to leave the room. No, we're very fully transparent with Dov. I'll let David answer, but what we have tried to do, as Dov was saying earlier, the French character in the book was a cop, a male cop. We turned him into a woman. David can tell you in a minute. But he was a character who was just there to make the other character look good, and it was a bit of an archetype of perhaps the way that the Israelis imagine the French, kind of grumpy and never very enthusiastic about working. And we thought, we can't do that. Although it's true, police inspectors are known all over the world for being very happy people. Yeah, they're jovial and sweet. So in addition from changing the character's sex, we made him her a more complex character. And the other thing that we changed pretty deeply was that the plot had bad guys from pretty much all over the world, from China, from Russia. We kind of tightened that up a bit, and the key bad guy is French, to try and bring things more into a kind of Franco-Israeli angle that our audience can relate to a bit more. So, yes, there is another female character that remains very close to what it is in the book, Oriana, who's a young lieutenant. She's highly ambitious and very pretty. And Abadi, our main character, who's an Israeli, is kind of in love with her a bit. But then, of course, it's off limits for them because they have a hierarchical link. And we thought if we change the French cop into a woman and make her older than him, and if we have 3 characters, 1 man and 2 women, with the age difference, that maybe could create an interesting momentum where we could fool around with various cliches that exist. Other interesting thing was that Abadi, for instance, could be a little bit more someone who cuts corners, someone who doesn't really follow the rule book. If something needs to be done, he just does it, whatever the rules. And she likes things to be done according to the rule book. So that brings another interesting clash there, because you have this kind of smooth operator from the Mediterranean, and she's completely impermeable to that. So he can't really use his charm as he usually does. And that creates a fun dynamics, and also allows us to explore the cliches that exist on both sides. And they need to work with their differences. They need to work together to solve the crime, which is leaving a trail of bodies. And then in your work, what is the show going to say about today's French society? What makes it topical and current? Does it have any message about French society today? Is it a message that was already in the book? What does it change in terms of the substance of how it describes the world and French society? Well, first of all, I would say that all great crime fiction has a subplot, another plot than just the crime story. In the Americans, it's 2 KGB spies who were technically married by the KGB, but in fact didn't know each other, and they're going to live in this fake marriage. And from one season to another, you think, so how does a marriage work? If you look at False Flag, for instance, which is being screened on Canal Plus at the moment, it's identity, the subplot, because there are all of these stories with aliases and false identities and so on. And I'd say that in this era of lies, was the integrity of those who serve the general public, who are public servants. So for me, Ariane and Abadi, as David was saying, Ariane kind of follows the rules, and he thinks that's integrity, and he has his doubts, not only because of his military service and espionage in general, but even Zionism and the State of Israel. He's a Tunisian Jew, a Sephardic Jew, who ended up in Israel at age 11 because his parents did their aliyah. He's really not sure it was the right decision, and he really doubts everything that he can see around him. And his own integrity is to say no to the rules, is to try and find his own answer to everything, because he's wary of everything and suspicious of everything. And we don't know that yet, but even the third character, the French character, who's going to become a woman police inspector, which is a good idea, may initially seem to be the portrait of the public servant who's just waiting for retirement. But he already knows that the police chief is already going to try and get rid of him. And he knows that truth, that professional truth, and therefore he's going to try and resolve the case by means that are not political and they're not entirely based on lies. So that is something that comes up for the reader very early on in the book, because you put yourself in their shoes and say, what would I have done? Should I refuse the very tempting offer by my superiors, like Oriana? She would have go up in the ranks of the army if she did 1, 2, 3 and just followed the orders. So of course it's very easy to say, no, I never would have behaved like her, but it might not be an honest answer. And of course, television is something that we have in our house, so it's an intimate instrument, and I think that will resonate even more deeply. And that's another thing on which we worked. There may be many things that separate French culture and Israeli culture, the way in which people work, human relationships, but some things are exactly the same. And in fact, in these two characters, what they have in common is they refuse politics, the internal politics of their ministries or whoever they're working for, because they want to do the right thing. And systematically, they are punished for doing the right thing. The family throws them out. They're losing their jobs. They're going to be sacrificed because there needs to be a scapegoat in the case, and that is what brings them together. And unfortunately, the culture of lies and duplicity, which seems to prevail in many, many places and seats of power, that is the same everywhere.
And there's one more thing. Today we live in a global world, and something that started up in Israel has a global effect. And this book, things that have happened in A200 actually are carried all the way to France and back to Israel. And actually in the book, it's even a larger picture. It goes all the way to the US and to China. So you have all those global interests that are woven up together. And the question of integrity versus corruption is not only an Israeli subject, but it's a subject which is relevant to the entire world that we live in today. So everything starts with something that has to do just with Israel, and we realize this is just the tip of the iceberg, and that everything is connected. The same way that the cyberspace connects us all, and everybody can be watched no matter where you are, what your nationality is. And so I believe this is relevant for Israelis and for French people, but actually for everyone, all over.
Sandra?
Non, juste pour finir, tout a été dit, mais...
Alors, so just to finish on that, whether you're an Israeli or Frenchman or from wherever else in the world, I think what brings us together is the question of morals and ethics. And that is what brings the character together. And whatever the country, there are institutions which are supposed to do good or to work for the good of the people, such as Unit 8200 in Israel, or the police force in France, but in every one of these institutions there are not just good guys. There are corrupt people who are going to make unethical choices, and it's the question of this moral or ethical choice within these institutions that drives the show, and that says that what unites people beyond borders is the manner in which they position themselves in terms of these choices.
And how do you use power? When you have so much power in your hands, how do you use it?
Je peux rajouter encore quelque chose? Non, parce que effectivement, ça c'était...
Well, yeah, that was, of course, those are the big themes in the book, in the novel. And I think probably the darkest thing that the book says is it's not honesty, it's duplicity. It's these two-faced characters that being two-faced allows you to be elected prime minister or move up in the hierarchy, and corruption works best to obtain results. And so in that world, what does being honest mean, and how difficult is it to say no to temptation? Because you know that not only are you saying no to corruption, you're also saying no to a better career. And I suppose that's what works really well in fiction, isn't it? Which is why I'm going to ask you how, from a very technical point of view, how do you work on this? This is still early days in this adventure, but how did you get in touch together to start writing? What do? Do you have physical meetings? Do you write to each other? How much is Dov involved in writing the show? How do you go about things?
Well, should I answer that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. When I heard that there's a French writer that is going to come on the show, I really hated him from the start. I mean, it's not something you like, right? Somebody you don't know, he's going to collaborate with you. Who is this guy? What experience does he have? And all that. So when we first talked, it was suggested that he will come over to Tel Aviv. And I was trying to say, not now, maybe later, maybe next month. Eventually, he ended up showing up in Tel Aviv, and I met David. And lo and behold, he was a really nice guy. And even more than that, we found out that communication is really easy, and that we think in a way the same way, we understand the book the same way, and we even work the same way because we are very easy with ideas, and we don't feel, oh, I had this great idea, you should never change it. We can change ideas very easily, and the dialogue was very creative, and we had a lot of fun. So fun is important. And I said, okay, I'm having fun working with this guy. Maybe this can work out. And
now you thank me.
Now I thank her, and I want David to come and work on all my shows. And now he's taking Hebrew lessons in order to come to Israel.
Yeah, I'm becoming Israeli.
Yeah, so Sandra, the matchmaker, it went very well for her, and we said, you know, in the Hebrew tradition, once you make a good matchmaking, you win points in heaven. So Sandra, at least 10 points
Great.
for you.
10 points when you get to...
Yeah.
No, but je vais repasser en français. C'est une bonne nouvelle et c'est toujours.
No, it's great news. It's always a surprise, actually, and you hear a lot of different things said about this. There is no set way to make it work. There are no rules, and it's like when you meet somebody romantically, either it clicks or it doesn't, and there's no way of knowing that. So what I would say is that as a producer, it's worth really keeping it in mind. I'd met Leora, and I'd talked to her a little bit, so I had my first impression of her personality. But there's also what she says, so it's her raw material and what she's made of it, made of Dov's writing. And for an author, it's always difficult to see another writer come onto the scene. And as a co-producer, you have to make sure that people you work with are flexible and good communicators. Otherwise, as a producer, you'll probably have a lot of tension and disagreement to deal with. So I think you need to keep that in mind. People's personality, authors' personality, they have the right to have their own personality. Some are more flexible than others, and that's just the way it is. Some like to stick to their own ideas or have a good way of communicating them or not. And you, Dov, where do you sit in the middle of all this? Well, I am totally available, and the world of espionage and communication is a very complex world, and if you want to be sure not to make any mistakes, then I would always be available for them. But now they've made it into their own art, and it's their skill that they now need to express, not mine. I have a friend who directs the Bathsheba dance company, and she said it would be great to make my book into a show, a dance show. I'm not going to go and see Yoad Narin and say, put 3 dancers on the left and then they dance together. No, I don't know the first thing about it. So what some authors say is that they want to write TV series. I don't know if that works because it's a completely different job. I mean, it's perhaps a little bit arrogant to look at things like that. TV series are more recent. It's a recent development, I would say, but they reach out to millions of people. And perhaps literature should stand back and ask itself whether it's still capable of generating as much empathy as TV does, as TV shows do. So I think we need to remain humble in this, and that's going to gain time for me because I have another book to write. So they'll do their own thing. I'll go and see it. I know that I'm going to like it already, but it's their baby. And if A Long Night in Paris, if the rights are bought by a Japanese manga author, it will then become their story, not mine. Everybody is free to interpret as they like. And I'm thrilled to have this team with me. And so for me, I'm just going to be watching it. Well, if it's choreography, a great contemporary dancer, that's great. That's a dream you have, perhaps. Okay, so where are you on the production process of this series? On the writing? On what can you tell us today? Well, the document we have ready to present the series today is roughly 15 to 20 pages long and introduces the first episode, the characters, the plot, and what happens in Series 1, because we haven't ruled out further seasons. And right from the start, Keshet, the TV channel, not just the studio, is in on the deal, and we now need to find a French broadcaster. So we are negotiating that at the moment with the French, and they are giving us their feedback. We would like to find the right partner, the one who shares our vision and understands what we have to say. There are lots of different ways of understanding this story, and you can see different things in it. You might be more aware of the characters' personalities and dilemmas or the plot, or you might wonder about the register, something that is very important for us. I mean, When Dov says, I describe reality in a dark way, giving it a bit of a flippant description, that's great because that's what we want to keep. So we want to find a broadcaster who is willing to keep that. And then we've matched two authors. We have to make sure that our broadcasters match as well. And find somebody who wants to work with Keshet. And on directing, have you already thought about who could do that? Yes, we have. We've got a short list of names, French and one Israeli. I won't tell you those names today because nothing has been decided, but we are thinking of people who can understand the action and make sure it stays funny, comical. Have you thought about what will happen after on production, on the authors? David is going to come and live in Tel Aviv. You're going to film in Paris, no? On the writing, well, David, we're lucky enough, is perfectly bilingual. He writes in French, in English. So he communicates in English. They might each write in their own language, but I think it's very easy for them to write in English. So we're using English for now and probably will stick with English. And when we go into production, we will translate the dialogues into the filming language, which will be multiple, French, Hebrew, and English, because we will respect the real reality of the story. First, we'll write in English, and then when it comes to scripting the dialogues for the film, for filming, we will switch back to the native languages. How many episodes? 8. 8 times 52. Really non-stop cliffhanger episodes. Is there anything you'd like to add? Or perhaps we can take a few questions. Well, I have been asked to adapt film, adapt it to a film, feature film. What I try and do is write about problems or issues we have in our society. So this idea of populism, espionage, things that were not around 20 years ago. And therefore, I would like it to be viewed in a medium that belongs to our society, today's society. So I think you'd have to just accept that, as Nureyev said, ballet is the art of the 19th century. I think for the 21st century, it will be TV. So that's why I made it for TV. And why did we choose a series format for production? Because it could have been a film, that's true. There are constant cliffhangers. And as I said, it will be 8 episodes, so a cliffhanger at the end of each episode. And there is enough to tell this story over 8 hours. It's a little bit like 24 Hours meets Killing Eve. Why? Because it's a race against time in the book. And it's the case in the series as well. All happens within 24 hours. I mean, we're not going to do 24 hours. And Killing Eve for the register. So I think there is enough there to make a series. Good afternoon. A question on the book. I haven't read the book and I haven't seen the series. It's difficult to ask a question, but I know that the Israeli secret services and the French secret services work in the same geographical zone, but not with the same aim necessarily. So when you translated it from Hebrew to French, were there subjects that you thought, we can't do it any other way than this? I mean, did you have to change things in translation? Well, without knowing what I was doing, I helped overcome that because I don't want to spoil things for you, but for political reasons, the Interior Minister doesn't want his officers to get involved. Being humiliated by this Unit 8200 on his zone, he would like to be become president, and he can see the office from his office. So he would like this commissioner to take the blame for everything that happens within these 24 hours. So these issues were not a problem, but the integrity of these civil servants is something that I highlight. I left Israel. I met Benjamin Netanyahu for 3 interviews when I was chief editor for Haaretz, and each time I came away with the impression that I absolutely had to explain what was happening to the Israelis. So I got away from that Israeli situation. When you look around, I'm absolutely convinced that there are others who've had the same experience with Erdogan or Trump or in Italy. So these are global issues. Of course, you can call them Judean-Christian values. I mean, we're talking about Palestine, but actually they belong to all cultures. They are moral issues. The fact that they're no longer contemporary is not the point. So if that should arise, French Secret Service agents would have to act. We would ask the same question.
Yeah, I want to add something. I think that today politicians use conflicts and hatred towards minority, and even the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the conflict with Iran and whatever, in order to gain power, political power, and it's very cynical. And I think the book addresses it in a very evasive way, but it's there because it's not about the old kind of politics that we are all used to when we think about Mossad or the Middle East and everything. It's about the way the system is used and abused by politicians to get more power. And this is happening everywhere now.
Yes, and the other conversation that we were, of course, having is you know, the way that power uses minorities to stay in power is, of course, fascism. I mean, that's a fascist invention, and it has been used by fascists all along. And every time I say that, everybody says, wait, this is not fascism, you are exaggerating, this is not Germany in 1930s, this is not Italy. And I say, okay, but if I say to you that 1920s America was capitalist, and 2019 America is capitalist, you're not going to tell me, okay, no, it's different. 1920s capitalism was different. Of course it was different. It was 100 years ago. I think that this is also something that is very important to remember, that I have a feeling in me, a creeping feeling that there is a rise of fascism because of that ideology. The ideology of systematically using ethnic minorities, weak people who are downtrodden as an excuse to gain power or to remain in power. And I think that that is everywhere. It's not just in Israel or in Turkey or in Italy today. I mean, this thing with the boat. I mean, I was horrified. I mean, and I think that we are getting used to it. And I think that these two characters in this book and in our series refuse to accept it in their own way, but without being revolutionaries or political activists in any way. They refuse it from within the system. They are cogwheels within the system who refuse to be part of that machinery. Actually, the machinery is changing, and they refuse to be part of the new machinery.
J'ai une question et une remarque.
I have one question and one comment. This morning in Walter's masterclass, he explained that you couldn't be as creative if you had too much money, and that Israeli creatives were a model. What do you think? What's your business model? And is it co-prod or international? And a comment for Sandra West. You are looking for broadcasters, but when we look at the French ones, there's just one channel, I think, that could broadcast this. I think we all know which one I'm talking about. Tell us.
The audience.
C'est Canal.
Canal Plus, of course.
Canal que ça va atterrir.
So are they going to buy it? Well, what I was saying, you have different ways of reacting or experiencing this. Everyone can see in it what they need for their channel. It's up to us to go with one or the other, or be more one way or another. Today, we have ideas that we don't want to compromise, and it will depend on the negotiations we have. We want to make sure who best understands our message. So, of course, Canal Plus is up there because of the Bureau des Légendes or False Flag and Killing Eve and 24 Hours. That we remember still. But actually, I think TV has moved on, and I think broadcasters are also experiencing this and ready to move on. I mean, I wouldn't see things in as black and white a way as that. Creativity, yes.
Listen, I've been talking a lot about creativity with no money. I know necessity is the mother of invention, so they say. So yes, we Israeli, we had to invent a lot of how to work with no budget productions and be very creative, and being able to go and shoot like endless amount of minutes per day. But after a while, you start feeling maybe if we'll have just a little bit of more money, our life would be nicer. It would be easier to work, maybe at least, less than 16 hours on the set. Maybe we do 10, like it's usually, like it's all over the world. So we hope to stay creative when we still have, when we have more money. But I don't think, tons of, like it's going to be US budgets. And also I know that when you have like too much and the sets become bigger and too many people on set, and it's becoming heavy to handle, this is no good either. Because it's nice to stay light on your feet and be creative and invent. So it's a matter of measurement, I guess. We won't say no to money, though.
Je suis américain.
I'm American, and in the US.
You Americans too. I can also say this in English. On a vu beaucoup d'histoires de Mossad.
We saw a lot of stories about Mossad, etc. So, for Dov and Sandra, I have a question. If that was a challenge for you to set this story apart from the others, I don't know if there's been a lot of Mossad stories told in France, but How would you convince people? Because they're saying the same things, aren't they? It's like Munich or whatever. No, this is different. It's a different Mossad story. Well, my book is the first book in the world that deals with the kind of espionage that produces 90% today of military intelligence in the world. Espionage in the world is split today between electronic intelligence, communication intelligence, and human intelligence. All American novels, right from the start, and specifically American, deal with human intelligence, except for Tom Clancy, who does ELINT. There is no espionage that deals with comment. And according to official Israeli sources, it is responsible for 90% of military intelligence. So the Israeli attack on the atomic reactor in Syria, almost all military Israeli operations of the last 10 years would not have been possible without this 8200 unit. It's got nothing to do with Mossad, which is a unit core, if you like. There's a lot of fiction. Some American authors write Mossad stories without even speaking Hebrew, and I think that's quite remarkable. But that has nothing to do with the world I am trying to describe. And when I decided to write this novel, what we said was we wanted to tell the story because around me, all of the espionage story from James Bond to George Smiley to whatever are dealing with human intelligence, except Tom Clancy. And that's very, very technical with signals, etc. That wasn't interesting. So why? Because all of this information that comes through your emails, and before that, telexes, but from your smartphone, from your USB key, from your loudspeaker, Google, Alexa, and whatever else, your credit card, but even worse, your loyalty cards for Monoprix or Amazon or whatever. All of this information is what constitutes espionage today, the subject of espionage today. So any novel, the novels around today do not deal with this. And so I think that's why this book was so popular. And the rights have been bought by the US, by Pegasus, and it will be published in February 2020, because there's no other novel on the market like it. But why? Because it's very difficult to write a story about three protagonists in an environment that's controlled by algorithms. How am I going to make that interesting? How am I going to make somebody want to read that? So it's up to you to decide whether I have succeeded, but that is the challenge that had not yet been fulfilled. Everything is based on Graham Greene, who said in one of his last books that the human factor was important. And the heroes there that are in South Africa, not in Israel, but it's a little bit similar because it's in the conflict years, have to deal with corruption, etc. So it's humans, MI5, but it's the human factor that changes everything. And any espionage novel should be called, I think, The Human Factor. But because that title had already been chosen, it was called Unit 8200.
Déjà, bravo pour le projet qui a l'air d'être
Well done. Congratulations for this project. It's very exciting.
Au-delà de la série, je voulais savoir à quel point, en
Beyond
fait, le climat
the
en
series,
Israël
I'd like to
permet, à l'heure
know
qu'il est, de
how
poser
things are
des
in
questions
Israel.
à travers la fiction,
Is it easy to
sur
ask these kinds of
l'espionnage,
questions
sur
through
les-
fiction
tout ce qu'il peut y
about
avoir comme choc
espionage,
civilisationnel, sujets
about
religieux, qui en France sont quand même des
religious
sujets hyper
issues?
sensibles
I mean, it's
sur
very, very
ces
sensitive in
points-là.
France to talk about this.
Well, Israel is is a strange country because on one hand we have the Ministry of Culture that tries to censor films and take away prizes from not political, from films that she doesn't like, that she thinks defames the country somehow. On the other hand, television, you know, we had Fauda, and we're going to false flag, and we have like really bold television because it's private money. It's not money that comes through funds. So you have to make a distinction. So in a way, yes, Israel is moving towards an authoritarian society. On one hand, you know, because of Benjamin Netanyahu and his entourage, if they still keep, stay in power in the next election. But on the other hand, it's also a very anarchic society, and we don't respect authority in any way, and we speak truth to power all the time, even, the men on the street. So so because of that, it's a free society. You can say whatever you want, and as long as it catches the attention of the public, you'll get the money to do it.
Comment les services secrets ont-ils réagi à la
How did the secret services react to your book? And you swore you wouldn't talk about that.
Non. Alors, d'abord, mon livre
Well,
a eu d'excellentes réactions dans l'unité
it
200.
had
Ça, je le savais.
great feedback from the 8200 feedback, but I knew that because it's their hero.
Par contre,
But
j'ai eu des coups de téléphone
I got some
très
calls,
nerveux d'autres
very
organismes
nervous
de
calls from
renseignement
other
qui n'étaient pas contents
organizations
de ce que je
that
relatais.
were very unhappy about what I
Les
was
guerres
saying.
intestines entre services
Now,
de
the
renseignement
power
israéliens
struggles between
tiennent
the
une
intelligence
petite part
services
du
in
livre.
Israel just make up a small
Mais
part
je pense
of
très sincèrement
the
que ce n'est pas
book,
très différent
and
avec d'autres pays.
it's probably the same in
Dans
other
mon
countries, I
expérience,
think.
quand
According
il y a
to me,
trop d'argent sur la table, ou
when
trop de
there's
pouvoir
too much
autour de la
power
table,
or money on the table,
il va y avoir des
then
guerres intestines.
you will get these power struggles.
Et donc, forcément,
And therefore,
les chefs des services de renseignement
the
comme le Mossad ou même
intelligence
le chef des
service
services
directors
de renseignement
like the
militaire,
Mossad
qui
or
plane
military
au-dessus, n'a pas été
above
content
that
du succès du livre,
were very
me
unhappy
l'a fait
with the
savoir,
book's
l'a fait savoir à son
success,
entourage.
and they made no
Ceci
bones
dit,
about it. They were very public about
comme
that.
j'ai eu énormément de réactions
And
publiques, y compris des critiques
a
dans
lot
la
of
presse qui venaient d'anciens
the
officiers de
critiques
renseignement et qui
were
disaient,
published, and some of them were from former intelligence officers, and they said this is exactly how it is. And so it was very difficult to undermine the book, and so I took them as compliments. As long as they weren't saying, this is impossible, what you're saying is nonsense, you've made a mistake, I was happy. So we just have a couple of minutes left. Do you have any plans, Dov, to write another book? Well, I would love to write a second book. It was written when I took a year off from working for Haaretz, so it took me 2 years. I had to prolong that, but I don't know if financially I could take another 2 years off. On the other hand, I'd love to write this book because the situation hasn't changed. I mean, we were talking about censorship. I'm an Israeli writer who's been living outside of Israel for more than 2 years, so I can no longer claim authors' rights from public libraries in Israel. The government decided on the 1st of January of this year that authors that were not patriotic enough by living in Israel would no longer be able to claim their rights if their books were in the library. So that, to me, was a reason to write the second book. I suppose that that's not what they intended. It's like the polygraph, isn't it? It's giving you some great ideas. Yeah, and just like my main roles, there's something very Jewish about me, perhaps. And yes, I will be writing another one. Great, thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions, then I'd like to thank you all again for coming today from so far.